Welcome back to 4FS Gaming. I am Ascendance, and in this video we will be looking very closely at the Wookie Warrior and talk about the specifics of his Bowcaster, his abilities, and also some tactics to get the most out of this pretty amazing reinforcement. Hopefully I'll also have some more videos on Destiny 2 and Titanfall coming later this week or next week, but until then I hope you're enjoying this Battlefront 2 analysis. So now on to the Wookie. He is a pretty infamous reinforcement at the moment, and I'm not going to talk too much about my opinion on if he is too powerful, but I really think he, as with the Flame Trooper, are in a pretty good place. It's more those other enforcers that need to be buffed to bring them back into line. One of the first things that you'll notice about the Wookie is that he is the only light side enforcer, which means that every single match has a chance for Wookie Warriors to appear. This makes them seem very common, which is one reason why they are so frustrating to go up against, and another reason why it's a really good idea to master the Wookie, because you'll always have him available if you're a light side. The other reason that people seem to dislike the Wookie at this point is, well, it's because they're actually pretty damn good, and they are also rather simple to use. So let's go through the basics. The Wookie has a base health of 350. This is good, but it's pretty standard for an enforcer. Definitely not as tanky as the 400 health Flame Trooper. The Wookie will begin to regenerate his health 6 seconds after taking damage, and he'll do so at a rate of 100 points every 2.7 seconds. This is actually identical to the Flame Trooper. In my last video I used estimations that were slightly different, but after further investigations, these are the health regeneration values of all Enforcer Troopers. Now onto mobility, and the Wookie Warrior moves at a standard Enforcer speed, which is slightly slower than a basic Trooper. He also has a dodge roll as his evasion move. Of course, as with all reinforcements, the Wookie can only be played in third-person view. Now this is not much of an issue, as third-person view does make it a lot easier to see where everything is on the battlefield. I just personally prefer to play in first person where possible for the immersion value. Just remember that while you are in third person view, you have a button which will change the shoulder you are looking over. This is pretty essential as it will allow you to pre-aim around corners and cover without exposing yourself to enemy fire. Now let's move along and look at the bread and butter of the Wookie Warrior, and this is his Bowcaster. The Bowcaster is an absolutely terrific weapon, and even if this was all that the Wookie Warrior had, I think it'd still probably be worth playing. Basically, this is a slow firing blaster rifle that fires 3 bolts with each trigger pull. These bolts are not burst fired, but shot at the same time, in a horizontal line. When you aim down sights, the bolts will instead reconfigure to fire in a vertical line. We'll talk more about how to aim this weapon later, but let's first focus on the damage. Each individual bolt at point blank range seems to deal around 56 damage to the body, so if you land all 3, it will deal almost 120 damage. If a bolt hits the head, you can expect to deal around 84 damage. Hitting the head with all 3 or even 2 bolts is very difficult, unless you are standing right next to or above the target. The Bowcaster does have range drop-off, which kicks in very quickly as you move away from the target. However, this drop-off does not lower the damage by that much at all. Body shots will never drop below 51 damage, and headshots will not be dropped lower than 75 damage. So in summary, each trigger pull fires 3 bolts. Each bolt does a minimum of 51 damage, increasing to 56 as you get closer to the target, and hitting a headshot provides a 150% damage modifier to that shot. The all-important task of a player when using the Wookie Warrior is to ensure that you land as many of those bolts on target as possible. So how exactly does this work? Well, like all blaster weapons, the Bowcaster bolts have travel time, so you will have to lead your targets and shoot where they are going, not necessarily where they are standing at the moment. The crosshair is also a bit deceptive. Although the middle dot displays exactly where the center bolt will travel to, the outer bolts actually have more spread than is indicated by the crosshair. This means that when you shoot, the bolts will land further away from the middle dot than the dots in the crosshair suggest. Keep this in mind when placing your shots. So then you have to decide whether to shoot with a horizontal or vertical line of bolts. Now, because the hitboxes of most targets in this game are bipedal humanoids, you will almost always be able to deal more damage to a single target by zooming in and shooting in a vertical line. If you land the shot, you will likely get 2 or even all 3 bolts on the target, dealing enough damage to one-shot most troopers. However, this is also less forgiving, because if you miss and hit left or right of the target, then you will likely miss with all of your bolts. Whereas if you were shooting in the horizontal line, then even if you miss with the center bolt, one on the left or the right should be able to hit and do at least some damage to the target. Also, against groups of enemies, the horizontal line can catch multiple targets at the same time, thus helping clear a crowd. Remember that for maximum effect, you want to aim horizontally fired shots at head height, while vertically fired shots should be aimed for the center of mass. If you line up the top crosshair dot with the target's head, the increased spread will actually make it go too high, so get in the habit of placing the vertical crosshair just below the target's head hitbox. There are some other properties of the Bowcaster that must be considered as well. The weapon can be fired 7 times before it overheats. If you are constantly firing, this will take 4.5 seconds. With this, we can calculate that the Bowcaster's rate of fire appears to be approximately 1.5 shots per second. So each shot is a precious commodity, and not to be wasted. The Bowcaster has enough firepower to waste a number of enemies before it overheats, but each miss is a significant opportunity for your opponents to damage you. Unlike flame troopers that can out-tank or blind their enemies, or rocket troopers who can easily escape fights, the Wookiee relies on simply killing any threats in order to stay alive. It is a very aggressive class. This means that overheating in the middle of a fight can easily cost you your life. Another thing that this Wookie Warrior is famous for is slaughtering heroes, particularly lightsaber users. Jedi seem to have issues blocking Bowcaster bolts, and although some damage can be deflected, most will penetrate a lightsaber block. The bolts are also good at breaking shields, simply due to the significant damage behind them. This also applies to vehicles, where the size of the target makes it likely you will hit all of your bolts in a single shot, thus dealing massive damage. Of course, it would not be a fair analysis of the Bowcaster if we didn't talk about the Overload version, which is the Wookie Warrior's central ability. Like other Overload abilities, the effect has a duration of 9 seconds, and a cooldown of 15 seconds. During this time, the Bowcaster will generate no heat, and it can fire continuously, although unlike Chewie's, it remains a semi-automatic weapon, not fully automatic. You will also notice that 2 extra dots are added to the crosshair, either in a horizontal line of 5, or when zoomed in as a cluster of 5 dots. So as expected, this will add 2 extra bolts to each shot that you fire while Overload is active. They will be positioned roughly where the crosshair indicates they should go. Now when shooting, it's really important to remember again that all of the dots except the one in the middle will have additional spread outwards when you actually fire, despite what the crosshair seems to indicate. This Overload ability does nothing at all to alter the fire rate, range, or damage of each individual bolt. So tactically speaking, firing the overloaded Bowcaster from the hip has limited usefulness. Against a single target, you are not likely to do any more damage than if you were firing the base version, because those extra shots on the side are probably going to go wide and miss anyway. However, against groups, you are much more likely to deal high damage, as many of your shots will catch a target. Walking into a crowded room or corridor hip firing like this is a great way to clear it out. It also can help catch a really difficult target rolling around when you just need to land that last little bit of damage. After all, it's pretty hard to miss with 5 horizontal shots. For me though, the zoomed in version is where the Wookiee really does get nasty. When grouping all of the shots together, it is not unlikely that you will be able to hit all 5 at close range, 4 of them at medium range, and it makes it easier to guarantee damage at longer range even against moving targets, as those extra shots on the side can catch erratic movements. So at close range, you can deal well over 250 damage instantly, and that isn't even considering headshots. This means that you can kill most heroes in the game with 2 pulls of the trigger, and most other units with only 1 trigger pull. Again, it is pretty important to be accurate, but the damage output here really is obscene. This is what makes Wookiees really quite hated. It's that they can kill any lightsaber hero while doing this much faster than that lightsaber hero can take down their health. Overload, however, is not all good for the Wookiee, as it will slow his walking speed down to almost nothing. It'll disable sprint, basically turning him into little more than a slow moving turret. However, that would be a turret that can still activate its dodge roll ability, and that's going to be essential for staying alive while Overload is active. Of course, the Wookiee, like all Enforcers, also has an explosive weapon. For him, this is the Thermal Imploder, and this is like the big brother of the Thermal Detonator. It has a fuse time of 2 seconds, along with a very distinctive sound cue. However, that damage of 200 at the center of the explosion, combined with a large blast radius, more than make up for the predictability. Just like the Incendiary Imploder, this grenade has a cooldown of 33 seconds, so they are few and far between. You need to use them carefully. The Imploder is an ideal tool to push enemies off the objective, and immobile or cornered opponents will easily fall to it. Lobbing this grenade into a crowded area will almost guarantee an impressive kill feed. The trouble is that good players will recognize the sound cue and have plenty of time to escape the blast. With this in mind, the Thermal Imploder can be extraordinary as a psychological tool. If the enemy hears one of these in their midst, they will likely run, dodge, and forget about whatever fight they are in to get away. Now that alone can turn the tide of battle, as you force all of your opponents to think about the Imploder instead of you or your team shooting at them. The final Wookie Warrior ability is Fortify, and this again is the same across all Enforcers. It provides you with a flat 175 points health buff that accumulates over 1.2 seconds. It will then last for 18 seconds, or until you take enough damage to deplete all of that bonus health. Because of the long uptime of this ability, feel free to activate it well before engaging in a firefight. Chances are it will still be there when you need it. Alternatively, you can save it as a heal for when you are really low on health. As with all Enforcers, it is a good idea to fortify before you activate Overload, so you have more health to counter your decreased mobility. After it expires, Fortify takes 22 seconds to come off cooldown, and that right there is an end to all of these stats and facts. So with them out of the way, it's time to discuss some quick tactics. I'll make a nice dot point list of my best tips, and I'll try and keep it nice and fast. Firstly, if you are accurate, use the vertical fire mode of the Bowcaster. It is almost always better than the standard configuration. When aiming, remember that the crosshair tells lies, and you need to account for the increased spread on all of the bolts except the center one. Wookiees, at their core, they're all about damage and versatility, so they are great on both attack and defense, but they do rely on killing everything around them to stay safe. That's because although they have decent health, it's not super high, and they certainly don't have amazing mobility, and they also have a large hitbox. Your best defense is to simply kill everything. Another tip is to count your shots. The worst thing that can possibly happen is if you overheat your weapon in the middle of a firefight. In a real emergency, Overload can be used to cancel that cooling animation. Use Overload to clear a room, or kill a high value target such as an enemy hero. This is best used offensively. You have to be careful when activating it defensively or in a panic, because it will disable your ability to run, sprint, and slowing you down can get you killed in a lot of circumstances. The Bowcaster, especially when overloaded, is absolutely amazing at damaging enemy vehicles from both afar and up close. Wookiees are one of my favourite classes to use on Crate, for example, when defending against multiple ATST attackers. Also, you should never be afraid to counter-snipe specialists with the Bowcaster. It is more than capable. It takes 2 shots from the middle of your Bowcaster to down a specialist, and they will need at least that, if not more, in headshots to kill you as a Wookiee. Finally, remember that the Thermal Imploder is a psychological tool as much as a physical one. It makes people literally run away, and you can use that to great advantage. Hopefully this guide was helpful, and if you have anything else to add about the Wookie Warrior, please let us know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and in the next few days I might put up another video just about my thoughts on the Wookiee's place in the meta and if it needs to be adjusted or balanced. Until next time, this is Ascendance from 4FS Gaming.